So, this episode, we're going to continue on the series where, rising the consciousness of people is no joke. You are tapping, if you are skilled at working at that skill level, with people's demons. And the whole point of this series is to just introduce you to the concept of spiritual warfare because a lot of people don't realize what's going on when they start opening themselves up to these different point of views. And this could be just as much as the spirit of a Bible or a Torah or the Quran as it can be doing divinity work with runes and nature and more ritualistic things. I'm not going to get into the debate. Every to each his own. I have my own beliefs and it doesn't matter. The point is that if you are of the belief and are working on ways to connect with the something bigger, the bigger picture, the supreme intelligence that seems to have mapped out much of what we are doing here, then you're going to want to listen into this series because there are some certain things that you need to protect yourself from. You need to protect yourself from. Not everybody in the regular world wants what's best for you. Okay? And when we're talking spirit, we're talking just energetics. If you want to even get it out of the spiritual realm, let's just bring it back to natural sciences and the fact that we live in a quantum world and we can feel other people's energies. And when other people are in a bad mood, sometimes they're at a maturity level where they're going to pull you down to them rather than do the work to pull themselves up and vibrate more like you. And that's just the reality of it. So what do we need to do? That's going to be in this episode of Owning Her Health as we dive into part 2 of the spiritual awakening.
Of Owning Her Health with your host, Dr. Lisa Holland, PT. Join Lisa as she starts the conversation on what it really takes to become a healthy, wealthy, and whole CEO of your life. Listen in to real talk by real lady leaders in all walks of life as they open up on personal health stories, wealth, career, and feminine abundant living. Learn how to grow by owning your body, expanding your mind, and aligning your soul with the purpose only you can pursue in this world. Happiness begins with owning her health right now.
Right. All right, so as I put in the introduction there, if you listened in, this is part 2 of a 3-part series that I just wanted to introduce the spiritual awakening, primarily because there's not a lot of safe supervision for some people, and we are at a state where we've been burnt out and we have a lot of people who are just mentally, physically being taxed, socially being taxed right now. Not that we haven't been, but in this day and age of being able to just Google up, as my spiritual teacher Dara used to say, Google, Swami Google Nanda, right? Listen to Swami Google Nanda. You can research anything. But sometimes, depending on the state you're in and how open you are and the circles that you're keeping, you need to just be a little bit aware of what's going on, okay? So that you're not opening yourself up to, let's say, an STD, a spiritually transmitted disease. Okay? Because everything is energy. We're talking at the quantum level. We have research that shows sick cells, weak cells, their frequency, their vibration is slower than healthy cells. In fact, that's part of what keeps the cell healthy. When you have a low heaviness about you, it's just harder to be going out and processing everything else you have to process. It just makes common sense. Okay, there's no magical mystery thing kind of talking here, except for the fact that human beings happen to be very, very mystical, very amazing. Our bodies are crafted to be these wonderful fine-tuned instruments that work way better than your iPhone, whatever recent, 14, $1,500 iPhone you have. The technology of you. If you've made more of an investment this year into your technology than you've put into your body, you got to really think about that. Okay? And you can't just be praying away and doing your malas and going on your spiritual retreats, and especially now with the use of psychedelics and these awakenings of consciousness, because that's really what spirituality is. Spiritual studies is the most intimate study of self. That's really what it is. You're getting naked from your ego. You're getting naked from the worldly success path. You're moving on to something, a bigger calling, to be like leaving this world with some sort of contribution and self-awareness so that you learn the lessons, right? You don't have to take the memories with you. You're supposed to take the lessons, leave the memories, and move on, because those times are not there. So I wanted to make sure that there's a couple of things that we discuss. And the things we're going to discuss today is to just hold the whole energetics between the masculine and the feminine, and between different ways of being, or power flexes I call them, between people. And there's different levels of this, right? There's everything from the astrology study to there's Vedic astrology, just tropical astrology, more traditional sense. There's looking at you from like human design. There's looking at you from like, very straightforward psychosocial graphics like I do, looking at um, an evolution of that sort of personality profile, also your core motivator, core drivers behind what we're doing, our quote unquote why behind it, right? There's intangible things that tend to follow patterns in terms of interaction. And one of those forces, the most primordial, primitive, before even formation, seems to be this idea of masculine, feminine. We can call it yin yang. We can call it, you know, uh, north, south. I mean, doesn't matter. East, west. However you want to put it, there's a universal law of polarity. Okay, no matter if you define yourself by any sort of identity, um, gender, type of division, you got to understand, no matter what, we all seem to come from a sperm and an egg. And the sperm has a certain way of behaving in energetic frequencies and cellular, properties. And the egg seems to have its own properties and behaviors. And if you actually ever went into studying things like, the egg wisdom, the feminine wisdom inside of it, the goddess wisdom inside the egg, and for all intents and purposes, we'll call it the man God wisdom in the male sperm, they serve a certain purpose. One is projectory, one is sort of, inserting itself in, intervening, and the other one is receptive, is a holding of sort of the potential versus the catalytic force. So there's the visual I want you to take is, this is a consistency in the universe, right? With whether you think of the theories of the Great Bang, the Great Bang, or you're thinking of God's creation or something, there seemed to be this matrix, right? This kind of primordial no thingness, right? That in came some sort of surge or life force, some sort of intention, with direction, with focus on the outcome desired, and creation of something, a world, a person, blah, blah, blah. An idea coming from the intangible. Same thing, some sort of intention. There's this matrix, this inspiration that comes to you. Some people believe that's just all them, that it is something that you are making out of the blue, all from your matter, all from your cellular makings. Other people understand it in a way that nothing we've thought up as humans is really just our own. If anything, what we're doing is we're getting inspired by the world around us. getting certain information in our sensory system and our nervous system, having certain biological sensations and reactions, and that causes us to respond and react. And these things, based upon our interaction with other forces, would create interactions of some sort of relationship with our environment, with other people around us, and we kind of navigate it from there. And it wasn't necessarily us. It's there already. The fact that the male of the species and the female of the species seem to need, have some sort of draw together, primal draw together. That's not of our human doingness, right? Although we have tried to kind of um, dictate how we're going to do that to some extent. Look at dating apps, right? That's a way of us adapting how we're going to be doing that. But the reality is, we're not really forming and being very successful in relationships. So sometimes when human beings intervene, what ends up happening is, while we might get our way for, mental ease or emotional comforts or physical sensation, it doesn't necessarily mean that good for us is, God or goddess good, right? Like, is not God like, in the sense of made by this supreme intelligence, whether you want to see it as a personification, as I speaking of, or, when I say God, I don't even see it as a personification. I sort of see it as this essence, this supreme intelligence that sort of holds us. And so there is some sort of polarities here I want to talk about. And when you are working on spiritual development, I want to open you up to the fact that you're going to be exploring. There's no way to spiritually evolve without exploring all of those forces produced by those even root forces of some sort of polarity in the beginning of, like I said, yin yang, male, female, masculine, feminine. We have all of this in every one of us. So every baby produced has the masculine, feminine. Every plant produced has the incorporation of, the pollen that came in from a different plant and that plant's cells. So there's this union or tantra, this yoga, this yug, that occurs through this polarity and births new forces. New forces that take on certain forms, but even this new force seems to grow into some sort of existence where it's biased towards one or the other in some way, even if it's just the physical, right? Like, you can self identify, let's say, feeling like you're in the wrong body, and 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 yet you're still made in a certain body. So, then we start getting into the levels of mind versus body awareness, right? Versus soul awareness. And can we be in one body but be another spirit of a different polarity, of a different energy? Yes, we can. We see this is happening. Is this an evolutionary thing? Is this something that's always happened? Is this, you know it doesn't matter. It's just here, right? So when you are practicing your spiritual work, be aware you're going to be opened up to the wisdom of all these things. It's not like education. Personal development gives you a lot of education. You may even get into some inspiration and motivation. But at some point in the game, should you actually get healthier? Should you actually get more sensitive and receptive? Should you actually be taking the time to silence your mind and be able to really focus when you're working, and that whole 80-20 rule, right? Only have to do 20% of what you know to be true needs, and then you have extra 80% of time you can do other things. You will be highly productive. You will probably be doing multiple things at a very high value, high impact, high achieving level. At some point, if you're operating at that place in the world, you're going to hit a wall where the choice is to either keep leveling up on a spiritual path, or you're going to probably start self destructing. Because for that type of person, complacency is actually a self-destructive type of thing. That's a sign something's going on. That's a sign of getting addicted or having something off or something. If that person starts to just decide that, they're going to live a life, that the person who has jumped on that bandwagon is not going to stay in complacency very long and feel healthy that way. Okay, so at some place there's going to be this spiritual leap, and you're going to be given information. You're going to be receptive to what I'm talking about if you're not right now. You're going to realize that, however you want to call it, there seems to be certain patterns because our brain is able to pick up these patterns. There seems to be certain operational systems underlying us that are sort of just programmed into us through our past experiences at a certain level that we are not going to probably change, but we will be able to become aware of them through these practices and through our obstacles, through our resistances, by keeping a better attitude. See, that's the biggest difference I see between the personal development journey and the spiritual development journey, is that you need to make a pretty big leap from the identity to the heart. And until you make that leap, we fall down a lot. We fall down and sometimes we don't get up, and we don't necessarily um, take confrontational feedback in a positive way until we've gotten to the point of, if I have enough self-love, if I have enough inner awareness, if I understand the big picture, if I have a consciousness level where I actually could see the bigger thing and I'm tapped into source consciousness and that supreme intelligence, I'm not going to take that poorly. I'm going to understand, and I'm going to be around the right people that can give me that feedback with me understanding and them understanding. I'm doing it out of love, with a commitment to love at that point to the heart. I'm not committed to fear. See, those lower energy levels, those lower centers of consciousness, you're committed to fear still. You're still fearing your survival. At the level of the heart, you're starting to like rationalize uh, things are beyond your body alone. There's a bigger story here. There's a purpose and things like that. So you're going to start to understand relationship, and you're going to start to realize that, wow, I have to take on much more leadership in certain times and ownership, the 100% responsibility over the outcomes. Not because I can control everything, there may be curves, but that's not going to sway me. That's not going to sway me from my faith and my belief and my trust in my abilities or in the bigger picture or anything like that. And you stay, even though the resistance may get harder on the spiritual path and what we talk about spiritual warfare, you are stronger. You're being molded by it in a different way. You're not fighting it. See, the personal development path, a lot of times you're kind of just putting on different robes, but in essence, you're not really changing. You're still a caterpillar. And that caterpillar might be wearing these clothes and then might be getting fatter, might be getting slimmer, might be eating different trees and this and that. But for the most part, everybody still understands you're a caterpillar. The spiritual development path, I'm going to warn you, you're going to die. The caterpillar dies in the cocoon. You're going to feel a need to retreat and protect yourself. The interesting story of the caterpillar is that its cells inside, its imagineal cells. Isn't that a wonderful name to remind us to go back to our childhood play and imagination for this process of transformation is what I'm talking about, right? Personal development works on change, and spiritual development works on transformation, because you're going to get these revelations, okay? There's no longer going to be a world that you used to see before. The BS is going to no longer be there. You're going to have different belief systems. You're going to have different truths, and then therefore different attitudes and behaviors and things like that. And when that imagineal cell gets activated, it gets activated by the formation of that cocoon. the activation of the cell doesn't occur and then you make the cocoon. You make the cocoon first. And so it's very natural on this path that I want to explain to you. Not only are you starting to get awareness in like how relationships have been on you, that you've been the pain in the ass sometimes. It really wasn't everybody else. You sourced it. You sourced that resistance so that you could learn this. You sourced that. And I know that's a really, really hard concept when you feel you've been victimized and abused, or you were at a certain age where you didn't have control. But the reality is if you are still in that moment in any way in your now, then what you're doing is you're giving away the control. You're giving away your power at the moment. And that is your choice. That's 100% your responsibility right now. And I know you're going to get some, I'm going to get some pushback on that. Okay. But that's why I'm saying I can maybe have this conversation at a in a different way or a different receptivity with people who have worked through their trauma and yes, acknowledged it was traumatized, are not making any positive or whatever, but have agreed to recommit to the now. Because that's really what it is, right? When we're living in our history, when we are still impacted by our history, then we are not living in the now. Because right now, you're not being child abused. Right now, you're not like your physiology right now should not be going into that because of a memory. Yet it will when that memory is still very triggering to you, right? So we need to make a choice. What can we do to undergo, you know, uh, I'm going to be talking in the next, in a couple of weeks. You can listen on with me and Laura Solomon, a nurse practitioner, really working on that jump of helping people use psychedelics for the journey working out of addictions and things like that. You can choose to go the path of yoga. I've worked through a lot. I've been working through a lot of my trauma uh, for almost 20 years using yoga. That's why I started using it clinically, because I saw how wonderful that was to get the identity shift, because ultimately that's what you have to do, right? Spiritual development is working on an identity shift that personal development is not. Personal development is working on your ability to be a better of you. Spiritual spiritual development is actually surrender work. It is surrender work. You are willing to die for the process. And I don't mean physically die for the process. I mean that those energetics of that anger, of the trauma, or of the feeling of fear, or like you're willing to cleanse yourself and become pure, like that, by that fire, right? Like the alchemist. You're willing to allow spirit, yourself, your supportive circle, your therapist, your coaches, whoever you're letting into the process, you're allowing them to be the fire under you to purify you from that. And what do we call that? We call that forgiveness. Again, not an easy concept. Not an easy concept. I mean, I still struggle when people like the forgiveness is for you, it's not for them, but you feel like it's for them. And you don't want to give him, and you don't want to give them the satisfaction. Listen, they don't care either way. They've already forgiven themselves. They're not waiting on your forgiveness. They've already forgiven themselves. That's how they've gone on. You deserve the same thing. And so you can see here, spirituality is just a study of being able to do all this. It's beyond personal development because your performance is not part of this equation. The mechanism by which you go through the process is not part of the equation. There's no one way to do this, and there's not one outcome. Everyone's success is the outcome, but how you define the outcome. On the personal worldly success path versus the sacred success path that I'm presenting to you, which is a spiritual, personal, bespoke uh, definition, is basically doing everything that with what using all the resources you've been given in the amount of time given to live to your optimal potential. And that may look very different between people. I will tell you right now, from everything I've seen and working with women and working with men, working with Division 1 athletes, working with the elderly, working with children, working with, older people, it seems to be that it is very different between women and men until, except for 2 points in life: the beginning of life when we're children and we're ruled by play and wonder, and then towards the end when we go back again to being childlike but not childish. We have extreme wisdom and we realize we need to be childlike and play and have wonder and joy again. In those two realms, it doesn't matter. Success doesn't seem to have a different look to it. It seems to be calm and peace and some sort of contribution and sense of relevancy, and not necessarily as tied to the ego and not necessarily tied to the accumulation of things or the other game, I call that, where you're sort of in comparison and competition. You're in the inner game, the self reflection, and you're in the other game, your relationships. You go back to the way you used to play early on. Except now, if you played the game correctly, which I believe requires a spiritual leap at some point, and I won't even say correctly, but to the max, okay? Then you're going to have now the wisdom that was at the such a subconscious, super consciousness level as a child that sadly it was wasted. And again, all children, some children are more gifted than others earlier on, call them old souls. Uh, but for the most part, what are you going to do with that? And now, my gosh, you have ability that you can stay engaged in society, and we are sorely lacking the leadership of the elders of the way. We have disregarded the elders for a couple of generations and their wisdom, and they were dying early, so it didn't matter. But now we're living. We can be living to 100 years old. It's not out of the question. It's not like that's something that is weird that's happening. We have pockets on this earth that has a lot of centurions and we've been trying to study them and look into them, but the reality is this may be, you may be at 50 years old right now, this may be just the halfway mark. I may have more years left than I've lived already. Who knows? What am I going to do? I know my parents were kind of on the downhill at 50. I'm sure they thought of their 60s being old. I feel like I have a whole new lease on life, that I'm just getting started, and I always visualize sort of after the kids are grown and that I get to go do something. I'm not too far off that same mindset. I might not have gotten here or there or where I'm going. Doesn't seem like it's going to be the same way I thought, but that's life. That's the curves. And it's not without a hustle. That's why I call it a curvy hustle. But that hustle's not grinding. That hustle is more of like a dance. That hustle is a sense of urgency and excellence and rigor and integrity bound, and is not perfection, and is not through like fear of like survival type of urgency, and is not anxiety provoking, and is not but it's excitement, right? Like you have to understand the difference. Physiologically, it might look very the same. Physically, looking at me from the outside, it might look the same sometimes, but it feels very different. It feels very different. And a spiritual awakening is going to give you access to understanding all of this, but it can be overwhelming, which is why I wanted to just introduce it. And we will have more conversations around it. But I wanted to introduce why you should do this with a guide. And what I'll finish off with is, like I said, because of the spiritual warfare, if you don't understand, it comes with the package. Why? Because the enemy, whether you believe it's in you and it's your own thoughts, okay, um, or it's outside of you. Um, it doesn't matter. But at some point, um, there's going to be a sense that identity, that you're becoming the butterfly, and not everybody will be happy for you. And I'm of the belief and of the sensation, and from my experiences that I've lived, not because I've just heard about this, that there is a spiritual realm, a metaphysical realm. Um, I know when I have an idea, I've made that become real. Where did that come from? How did I do that? Right? It wasn't when I made Belly Guru. There was nothing I was patterning it off of. This wasn't something I took from somebody else and put it. It literally came from me. Right? Our children come from us. But there's going to be a point where, at a spiritual level, if there is, let's say, a good and evil polarity, okay, and there seems like there is, because there always has to be the opposite, equal but opposite, okay, go by the physics. Every force has an equal and opposite force, okay, let's just go by that. So then if there's a good, or whatever you want to define as good, let's say, then there's going to maybe be what we would say as the bad. But regardless of that, if we're there, I want you to be very, very aware. The first thing that you will see as quote unquote spiritual warfare, opening yourself up, is that you will be moving, you get the call, you're doing pretty well, you find your mentors, you learning stuff, and then you get into complacency. Okay, you're going to be very tempted to go off the path of that has gotten you there. You're going to get very comfortable, and all it takes is a little bit of ego stroking, where you're not staying focused on, having a humility and being able to understand that there will always be more to learn, and that you're not the best, no matter how many letters you have or how many taps on the back you get, or, those things are great. But when you start performing, and then getting, no problem with wanting to be your best or show up in your best, against the level of excellence. But when you start comparing yourself, when you start getting so competitive where it's being detrimental to you, okay, like on this, so there's going to be a temptation to, maybe kind of lose some of your integrity when you're seeing those gaps in yourself. Maybe start telling yourself you're not so great, and that's the only window you need, right? Maybe you start doing a maybe if you stopped drinking, you start taking a couple drinks, maybe you, because you like, and then in that confusion, because remember, the enemy loves confusion, just looking for confusion, just trying to make you confused from your sovereignty. And in that little tap of time, it's just be on guard. Okay, like little temptations. When you set yourself up, let's say it's weight loss, and you said, and again, I think sometimes people take it to the extreme. You get competitive with yourself. I think that's why you need the guidance, okay? Because you need to be able to understand what's healthy and what's not healthy, and how you're setting yourself up for victory or victimization, okay? But if you're working with somebody and you're setting realistic goals or whatever, and you like, okay, I'm going to exercise, and you've done it for a whole month, you've exercised or done some sort of stretching or self care or mental work or whatever, mirror work, whatever, every day for 30 days, and then you say, I'm going to give myself a day off. That's great. And then that day turns into 2 days. And then you start to, at that point, you start to like put logic to it. Understand that's temptation has entered into there, and you're setting yourself up for failure once you make that compromise. That, again, that's not saying all or nothing, you get no break or whatever. I'm saying the first day you made the break, it was very, very chose, I'm going to take a day off. The intention was to take a day off. But then when you made it 2, 3, 4, and then you started opening the door to sugar again, and you felt bad about yourself and the emotional pull of it, that is exactly how that works, right? And then we get into spirals. The second level that's getting a little bit dicey is after you've opened yourself up to temptation enough, and you are not resisting it very well, nor are you getting any coaching or support for it. in a positive way, then you're going to start feeling pretty oppressed. You're going to start saying things like, ah, my whole life's a pain, or, oh, it just never works out for me, or like, I tried everything. I tried. Did you try everything? Did you try everything? No, you didn't even 100% try this the way as prescribed. And that's where you're looking for the disciplines, and where um, you're kind of sensing a stress that that on the outside should be like a passion, right? Like your exercise and taking care of your body and moving, and like find the thing where you can get passionate about it, that you can love on it. Again, commit to love, not do it because of fear of being ridiculed and ostracized and looking XYZ and something like that in comparison. And you need a little faith here sometimes, because gratitude is your threshold. Gratitude is the medicine for this. If you are grateful with everything as is, even when you quote unquote fail or make a mistake or choose whatever, if you have gratitude for the fact that you could see it, then it allows you enough of a gap to recommit. And once you recommit, clean slate ability. But you're going to need strategy at this point. Once you see yourself sinking into oppression, when you get just temptation, you might not need strategy. You know that you know what you got to do. But when it's gotten to the point of oppression, a sense of oppression from it, from what you were intending to do that was quote unquote good, godly work, feels aligned with your destiny in the sense of something greater than you pulling you, and you feel good in it and this and that, and then all of a sudden things start to change. It's because you're getting closer. It's because you're losing the identity that can be manipulated, and things against you are coming into it, and that could be very well people around you. That's why you have to start very much looking for people when you want to make a shift that are going where you're going and not where you've been. They're in the now with you, that's great, but if they need you in the now that will become the yesterday, then you need to sometimes you need growth friends. That's really what the work I do is I'm trying to form networks of growth friends, because they're not necessarily your social friends, and they're not your past friends. These are different groups. Okay, but this type of work, spiritual development, requires you need a success squad. You need growth friends. And they may never hang out with you. They might just, but they all know what the deal is. They all know how to look out for this stuff. Okay? Because what you don't want to get to the point is where you're getting infections. You're getting infections. Okay, this is the person that no matter what, that person that's horrible for them, they see them again and they're feeling bad about themselves, and they get some attention, and all of a sudden they're in a toxic relationship again with that same person, and they know it was going to be the same, but they were like hoping for it to be different, and then they can't get over them again. That's an infection, right? Like you're letting that person invade that person's energy, that negativeness around you, that even just people that just have never seen a level of success. If you're the first generation multimillionaire in your family, even though it seems like it would help everybody, you're going to have a bunch of people that want to infect you to stay in a poverty mindset like them, because you become a mirror. You become a mirror. They know where you came from, and they literally know that you're like them. And then there's really no denying why they didn't do what they did. They could start making stories. Oh, who do you think you are? You're because they need to see themselves as having a reason why they didn't do what you did. Okay? And so, you get the infection of that. And you got to be careful, because sex is a big gateway for that. That's why I hate the younger generation thinking of this sexual empowerment thing. And I'm not saying I was sitting there a prude and a virgin till the day I got married, but what I'm saying is I was very mindful who I was letting into my mouth, into my orifices. I mean, I understood the energetics behind it. I understood the fact that even if there's a morning after pill and whatever, which was not the case, I didn't have that yet or whatever, but even so, I understood that that wasn't preventing a pregnancy. That was interrupting my hormone balance, and that there was going to be prices to pay, possibly. That is not healthy. That maybe that was not worth it for what it ended up being. that maybe I can be patient and build a relationship. Like I'm not a primal beast that I got to hop on people all the time just because I'm feeling, I need. That's an emotional issue. I just worked on my emotional. I can tell you one thing. When I really practice my yoga and I do all the work or whatever, I don't need that attention from other people as much at any level. And I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. There's other ways to have an orgasm and it doesn't require other people. I'm just saying. And you can have relationships without them being sexual. You can have very deep, intimate relationships with people. It's just that if you're not somebody that's studying at a higher level of self and intimacy, then no, you can't. And you can keep working on your personal development, and you can keep pumping your arms with Tony Robbins, and you can keep buying whatever you want to buy. When you, by sheer willpower, get a lot of things. But I have yet to meet the person who's not miserable living that life. For when you get old and you can't take it with you, and you look around and you see the quality of your life versus the quantity of your life, I think that type of quantity-based living gets old. All right, let's close it here. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to close up shop on the third level right now. We're going to be talking about getting further into those power flexes and dynamics, talking about how to relate. That is the one to listen to if you're learning how to communicate, if you want to be better at enrolling people into your vision, or you getting enrolled into theirs. You want to learn how to listen. You want to work on a relationship. You want to work on core leadership. Listen to the next episode of Owning Her Health. See you then.
Thank you for listening into this episode of Owning Her Health with Dr. Lisa. To learn more about her personal and professional development service, visit her online at drlisahollandpt.com.